All right, one last look at your traffic and weather for your ride-in on this Wednesday morning. Couple accidents to report. One at Garner's Ferry near Congaree Road. Another one at Lady Street and Hugie. And then one more at I-20 westbound after Highway 6. Today, a little bit warmer. High of 62 with some clouds throughout the day. Tomorrow, rounds of rain with a high of 61. And Friday, sun finally comes back out with a high of 60, sitting at 31 here in downtown Columbia on your Wednesday. Oh, 9 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point. Tyra Head along with you here in studio in Columbia. Jack Velcher hanging out with me this morning on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines because he's making his way down from the upstate, and we have a lot to unpack from what happened last night at Little John. First of all, Jack, how are we doing this morning?
Doing good, sir. Yeah, I wish I were there with you in studio, but alas, it's a nice perk to have a brother that goes to Clemson just so I can stay at his emptied out apartment last night. So, yeah, definitely thankful for that. And, yeah, back on the road now, about an hour 45 out from Columbia, but ready to talk with you this morning.
So you sent him to your apartment. Was he not there? Was he already gone for the break?
No, so what happened was he went back to Fort Mill last week.
Okay.
And I think Clemson has been done with school for over a week now, so he went home for the semester. But when I told him I was going to Clemson, he let me go stay at his place. So he gave me his keys and all that. And,
okay.
Crashed to his place last night.
Very convenient. One thing to point out from last night's game, before we get into the ins and outs of what happened, it did seem like a little bit of a duller environment, and I think this is a question that everybody asks a lot with this game, is why you play it in a time where there aren't students on campus, especially for like last night, again, a week before Christmas. Like, you can add so much more juice playing this game like 2 weeks before when you have people on campus, students there, and all that kind of stuff, because it definitely seemed like, and at one point in the game last night, Brad Brownell is out there trying to fire the crowd up in the late stages. Like, you shouldn't have to do that, especially in a rivalry game.
And the interesting thing about that, from being there last night, was that it was actually a very good crowd. In terms of pretty much most, if not all, of the seats were filled. But you're right. I couldn't get a real gauge on how – there were definitely students there, but I could not get a gauge on like how many were actually there. Probably not as many as you would normally get for a Clemson home game. And that is just because you have a lot of kids going home for a break. I mean, they've been on break since middle of last week. So it's like, yeah, I think this game probably should. Think about it with women's basketball, when that game takes place.
Yep.
It's usually very much early in the season, well before kids go home. So I think that would be pretty good. Somebody brought the idea yesterday to me, like, how about a home and home? Like, it would be tough to do it probably during the spring, but I think a home and home where you're playing your conference games and then the middle of the conference slate, you get like a one-off game against Clemson. I think that would be cool, and that would be a good opportunity to have more students and fill up the arena. And that way you're playing at both arenas every single year. But, this one-off home-and-home thing every other year it's fine, but it's tough right now during December when you're not going to get the full crowd experience that you normally would otherwise.
Yeah, again, just swap it with one of the non-conference games that both these teams had against mid-major opponents earlier on in the month, and I think your issue was solved there. Again, there's a lot more pressing matters at hand, but that did stand out to me watching it on TV last night. It's like, man, it just doesn't feel like the juice is quite there the way it should be for what this game means to both programs.
Yeah, you're right, but give Clemson fans some credit. I mean, they definitely showed up last night. It's just, it did not have. It's weird because it was filled, but it just didn't have that same juice you would normally hope to have for this type of game.
Well, speaking of juice, Carolina did not have that in their performance as they come up short 68-61. We'll unpack what happened last night right after the Sandstorm pick-me-up.
Time to get hyped. Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm, sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nines.
It is time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803-ALL-9s. So last night, again, Carolina falls 68-61 to Clemson in the upstate. And this was a game, Jack, where they came out of the gates pretty hot. 12-5 run there to open things up. Mike Sharp gets out there, scores in a couple of different ways, and you're feeling pretty good. And then Clemson proceeds to go on a 15-0 run, and that kind of set the tone for what the rest of the night would be. Just a very sloppy, uncomfortable slog of a game, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there that they did play pretty well at the start. I think they, after not being ready to play against Citadel on Saturday, they looked a lot more ready to go in this game. It's just the problem for South Carolina is they got way too sloppy turning the ball over. I mean, in the second half, in the first 6 minutes, they had 6 turnovers. I mean, they were just making careless mistakes, and that's going to lead to empty possessions, where on the other end, Clemson, who wasn't even playing that well last night, was taking advantage and making up for South Carolina's mistakes. And on the other end, South Carolina just could not shoot last night. And that's been a consistent problem for, pretty much the entire season at this point. I mean, there have been a few games early in non-con that they shot pretty well. But, since probably, the Greenbrier, they really have not been shooting particularly well. And last night was a perfect example of that. You go 4 of 26 from three-point range. For a team that is built to shoot the three-pointers, they surely cannot make those shots. It is just, for whatever reason, I even asked the guys last night and Coach Barris, I mean, is it a mental thing? Is it just something that is just wrong? I mean, I really could not put my finger on it. And a lot of these guys felt the same way. It's just like they really don't know what the issue is there. Kobe Knox felt it's a little bit mental, but at the same time, they're getting open looks. They should be making these shots. And, when you have a team that has so many shooters and you don't have that true inside paint presence, that becomes a real issue for South Carolina.
Well, and that's the thing. When we looked at the numbers for Clemson yesterday, we knew they were a team that was going to contest a good deal of three-pointers given how they played earlier on this season. But Carolina did have those opportunities at some open looks. They created some shots. It's just that they weren't falling. And again, we've come up with just about every excuse in the world up to this point on why it's not happening. I think it's just becoming the reality of what this team is. And to further highlight how bad it's gotten, in the last 2 games, you've been under 15%. You are 7 of your last 49 attempts from 3 between the Citadel game on Saturday and that game last night. And now in 11 contests you've played this year, you've shot under 30% in 7 of them. And when that is supposed to be an identity of what your team is offensively, that's not going to get it done. And I don't have a ton of belief that that's suddenly going to change overnight as we head into conference play coming up here in January.
No, I don't either. I mean, could South Carolina eventually get it going? Sure. I think there will eventually be nights where they do make 10-plus three-pointers, and that will give them a chance to win a game when they're shooting the three ball pretty well, like over 30, 40%. The problem is we have yet to see South Carolina figure that out consistently. Like the first 2 games of the year, feel like an anomaly compared to what we've seen over the last 3 to 4 weeks. It's just been a team that is sloppy and they don't make shots. That's a recipe to lose in a lot of ways. And again, as I mentioned, they are sorely missing a true dominant front court play. I don't think, Christ Isendoko has been fine, but he's not exactly, he's not your Colin Murray-Boyles that you had last year. Nobody on this team is.
Sure.
I think that's the thing that this team is really lacking right now is somebody that, even if those shots aren't falling from the outside, you're going to have somebody to at least clean up on the inside and make your tough shots close to the rack.
Well, and obviously you look at a guy like Michi Johnson, who's one of your most experienced guys, and it's obviously been in the system, on and off for several years now. So he's going to do a lot of things to dictate how successful you are. And when he doesn't have any points in the first 27 minutes, didn't score his first field goal until 8 minutes to go in the game, that's usually going to be a bad sign for your offense. It's not like he wasn't getting opportunities. He was taking shots. He was getting looks. They weren't falling.
But is it surprising, though? I mean, look, no disrespect to Michi, but this is pretty much who he is, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to get some really good games out of him, and then you're going to get some absolute duds. And last night was certainly a dud in a lot of ways. And look, it was coming off a 3-game stretch where he had 17 or more points in 3 straight games. So he's been playing fairly well this year. He's averaging more points than he ever has in his career at 15.5 points per game. It's just there are always these games just at random. You can't even really figure out when it's going to happen. He's just always seemingly due for one of these off nights where shots aren't falling. He can't generate offense. And look, let's be honest. South Carolina did not bring him back to. He did other things last night, right? I think he had 6 rebounds, 4 assists. He also had 3 steals. That's great. But let's be real. South Carolina brought him back to be the scorer that they need him to be, that they were really missing last year.
Sure.
And at times he can be that guy, but at other times it's like he goes missing, and I think that affects the rest of the offense.
Yeah, the Michi go-off game is something that is really become a thing where, he'll go out there and score you 20, 24 points, but then he can follow that up with a single-digit point performance after that. And again, a lot of what you expect out of him is what he does when it comes to scoring. And last night certainly was not one of those nights when that was happening. And all that being said, this was still a 7-point game, but it's one of those weird things where it didn't feel like it, and really Clemson's inability to shoot free throws was really what kept South Carolina in this game, because they could have won this by another, 5, 8, maybe 10 points if they were making their free throws at a higher clip.
If South Carolina found a way to go on a run there in the final minutes, they could have probably found a way to win this game. Michi put it best to me last night. If they had just shot better, they win this game. I mean, it's as simple as that. But when you go 4 of 26 from three-point range, when you're shooting about 37% from the field, you're going to be very hard-pressed to win a basketball game that way. And we could say Clemson kind of kept South Carolina in it, which is very true. But I think the bigger story here is that South Carolina continues to find ways to beat itself. I mean, when you have double-digit turnovers and you combine that with all the missed shots this team had last night, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to beat teams at their own game. That's the problem right there.
Yeah, just an ugly performance all around for South Carolina. We'll hear a little bit of what Lamont Paris had to say after last night's game and talk about where, if anything, we can find some optimism going forward as we continue on with the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri with you here on your Wednesday on the game.
Are you a small business owner, a church, or other entity in need of a new HVAC system? Well, AAA Heating and Air has exciting news for you. AAA now offers financing to qualified organizations to aid them in installing a new light commercial HVAC system. It's as easy as calling AAA Heating and Air for a quote or finding them online at callAAAtoday.com. Tell them Bob and Sherry sent you. At AAA, they've got your back. They're offering up to 12-month payment plans on repairs with no credit check. That's right. No need to worry about your credit score. As long as you're a homeowner with a valid bank account, you'll be good to go. Take control of your comfort today by giving a call to AAA Heating and Air at 803-677-1500. Again, the number to call AAA is 803-677-1500, and breathe easy again.
All right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. It's our Ed and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Going back over what happened last night as South Carolina falls to its rival Clemson in the Upstate 68-61 to drop to 0-4 against quad 1 and 2 opponents. And again, not shaping up to have a lot of optimism going into SEC play coming up here in a couple weeks. But let's get into what Lamont Paris had to say after the game last night, starting off with him assessing the team's offensive issues?
I mean, there was one component that was involved, that's shooting. But then also, I thought that their pressure was affecting us. Their man-to-man individual pressure, just making some of our catches a little further away. It made a couple of guys a little more tentative to attack. We got off to a good start. Really good start. And then they bank one in, and then it just changed. It's amazing how things happen. But yeah, I think the physicality, we were not able to, without getting myself in trouble, it was a low level of freedom of movement. And that's not to say anything other than as I watched guys move around, it did not seem to be as freely as they would have liked to. And, they play a physical brand of basketball. And you have to find a way to maneuver around that when the game's being called that way, or one particular player's being real handsy as you're trying to get to here or get to there. And so part of that's a learning process. But it was harder for us to move offensively, just to move around and move the ball the way that we like to do offensively. And some of that, a lot of it had to do with how physical they were with us defensively.
And Jack, when you look ahead to SEC play, if you're not able to combat physicality, it's going to be a long couple of months going from January to March with some of the teams you're going to be going up against. And last night, again, was concerning for a team that did push you around a little bit, that you were not able to overcome that or match that in the same way.
That's going to be the issue, I think, for South Carolina this year, is that they really don't have that. I mean, look, are some guys getting rebounds? Sure, like Eli Ellis and Michi. I mean, like those guys that have been getting boards for South Carolina, but those are guards, right? Like
yeah.
The problem with this team, Tyler, the way it's constructed, honestly, I think the construction could have been so much better because they went out and got shooters, right? Supposedly. That hasn't really worked out the way you had hoped. But you went out and got shooters to kind of fill that void you had last year. The problem is you didn't go get somebody or players to kind of replace what you lost in the front court. And, I mean, you brought in Easton Doko, but, I mean, was that really like a big wowing type of move? I don't think so. I mean, I think you got some guys in this team that can go get rebounds and play physical, but it's not anything compared to the rest of the SEC, I don't think. I mean, we've seen them struggle in these games against these, what you would call your high major opponents. I mean, they're 0-4 in Quad 1 and Quad 2 games for a reason, yet they're 7-0 against the teams that, are mid-majors that they're supposed to be.
It's also worth noting that Eli Ellis did not play last night. He was out there in warm-ups, but after the injury from the other night against Citadel, decided not to go, for precautionary reasons, if nothing else. And yes, he's somebody that has been able to help you generate offense. But going back to your point about what you went out and got in the transfer portal, the success of your team, quite frankly, shouldn't be dictated on a bench freshman point guard and whether he plays or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, Eli Ellis plays just about as many minutes as anybody on this team, so losing him last night was definitely a big loss, even though he hasn't been playing, great recently. I mean, he's still averaging about 10 points a game, but, I think he's kind of going through those freshman woes a little bit, missing some shots. I mean, he hasn't shot great from three-point range at all this year. I think he's about 23% right now, so you kind of hope he can get back and be healthy because, again, he's playing nearly 30 minutes a game. And that's a lot of minutes to replace, especially when you look at the bench points last night. That's another underlying factor of what happened for South Carolina to lose this game. Clemson outscored them off the bench 41-14. So that just tells me right there, Clemson has the depth necessary to go out there and put together good runs, which is exactly what we saw last night. While South Carolina, I think this is a team still struggling to figure out what its true identity is going to be, and you need to get more out of these players. It's as simple as that. I mean, you brought these players for a reason to reconstruct this roster entirely to have a better season. But right now, you're kind of on track to have that same season you did last year, unless things change.
And it's one of those games, again, it didn't feel like it was only a 7-point game. It felt like, Clemson was leading by 15 to 20 for most of the game, but it did end up being a 7-point result. And we have a game that on the scoreboard is that close. You go back and look at specific moments that really stand out of where things could have been different. And I look at a couple of end-to-half sequences for Carolina last night, in addition to the sloppy turnovers there to start the second half, that really stand out as difference makers. You had the situation at the end of the first half where Kreese gets called for the charge with about under a minute to go, and then right there at the buzzer, Hayden Asimian just doesn't get the ball up in time to put the shot in before the half runs out. That could have given you 2 more points going half there, would have made it 34 to 29. And then right there at the very end, with just over a minute to go, Michi completely misses Norton Capich on an inbound pass. It's like, where is kind of this disconnect happening in these late critical moments at the end of the half or the end of games? And if you go out there and you change a couple of those things, you're talking about a game that's a whole lot tighter. But again, that's just kind of a lot of the issues this team's having, is doing the small things like that wrong.
It's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them in conference play, because you couple all these things together, Tyler, the mistakes, the turnovers you're making. They're such silly turnovers too. Also, it's like they're getting stripped so quickly, so easily by defenders, losing the ball. They're making sloppy passes. They're not making shots. Everything we're saying right now, and I hate to be negative here, but this sounds precisely like what we saw last year. Now, let's pump the brakes for a second, because last year's team was able to go out there and be competitive in SEC play despite coming up short in a lot of these games. They were keeping it close. We're kind of seeing the same trend a little bit right now, where South Carolina is losing close. But like you said, Tyler, last night did not feel like a close game really at all. Clemson led by double digits most of the way. It's just South Carolina kind of made it a bit closer at the end, thanks to Clemson missing 20 free throws. So, look, the real problem is it's not one big issue that you have to worry about fixing. This would be a different story if it's like, oh, well, they're just missing 3-point shots. You can figure that out over time. The problem is it is missing 3-point shots, but it's also all these other factors. And when you put it all together, it's going to be tough to figure it out before conference play starts in a few weeks here.
Yeah, again, you get a couple more games here to wrap up the 2025 calendar. Here you got South Carolina State coming up this weekend, and you get Albany on December the 30th. Then you jump in there with one of the best stories in college basketball this year, Vanderbilt, who's quite literally one of the best teams in the country. That'll be a home game on January the 3rd, and then you're thrown into the fire. And again, you're going to have to be around 500 in conference play if you want any shot of making the NCAA tournament. And I just don't think we've seen enough out of this team this year to think that they're going to be able to do that. Now, like you said, there's going to be nights where they hit it and the shots are falling and all that kind of stuff, but it seems like that's going to be fewer and farther between rather than a common thing.
Never say never, but I don't see it right now. I don't see a team that is going to go out here and be around 500 or slightly worse to make the tournament. They're going to be 9-4 likely heading into conference play. You probably, to get to about 20 wins, you need to win 11 games in the SEC. And can we realistically expect that? I don't think so. I think that would be over 500 first off. I don't know. I think this team right now is in a lot of trouble. They went 0-4 in quad 1 and quad 2 games in the non-con, and they came up close to beating a lot of these teams. Let's not get that twisted, but South Carolina, unless they can just figure things out offensively, I think the biggest thing they have to figure out before SEC play starts is they got to get that shot going. If they can shoot a little bit better, we're talking like closer to 35, 40% from three-point range, they will have a chance to beat most teams any night. The problem is, you go 4 of 26, you're not going to beat anybody. So I don't think the SEC is as good as it was last year. It would be hard to imagine that being the case. But I think for South Carolina, they've got to find their shot, because that's going to be the way that they stay competitive in these games.
Another tough night of the hardwood for men's basketball. We'll get them back in action again on Saturday as they take on South Carolina State. We'll have some tickets to give away to that a little bit later on in the show. We do have some news as far as the transfer portal goes for football. We'll share that coming up next as we continue on with the Extra Point. Tyler Ed and Jack Beltry with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. And as we navigate our way through the month of December and into January, news is set to break at just about any moment in terms of guys going into the transfer portal. And obviously once we get into January, guys coming out of the transfer portal and committing to South Carolina. We've got a new addition of somebody heading into the transfer portal. This news just breaking a few minutes ago via Pete Nakos of On3. Trevon Ball is set to enter the transfer portal after 3 seasons here at South Carolina. Of course, he started a majority of the games as a freshman back in 2023 because of all the injuries. Didn't play quite as much last year, and then started 11 games for South Carolina at right guard this season. And, the results were definitely a mixed bag. Struggled a lot in conference play, as just about everybody did on the offensive line. But Trevon Ball seeking an opportunity to play elsewhere in 2026, Jack.
It's a tough loss from the standpoint of now you're going to have to replace a veteran starter on your team that in 35 games played over 3 years, he started 19 games. He started 11 games this year. Like you mentioned, didn't play a ton in 2024, didn't start 8 games, and as a freshman, which was his all-SEC freshman year, started in 8 games. So you got to replace a guy that started nearly 20 games. That could be a little bit tricky. However, I will say, like you mentioned, Tyler, it was a bit of a mixed bag this season, and I think, look, the reality is this is probably not going to be the last offensive lineman to enter the transfer portal from South Carolina. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw more over the next few weeks here, just because, look, you have a new offensive line coach. Clem is probably going to want to bring in some of his own guys from TCU that he feels good about. Yeah, I think they're going to hit the portal pretty hard. I mean, Shane Beamer mentioned it recently. Like, they're going to be hitting the portal hard for offensive linemen this cycle. Like, they have to. Their offensive line was not good this past year. When you're giving up 42 sacks for Lenore Sellers, some of them on Sellers that he shouldn't be taking. But for the most part, the blocking this year was just not good enough. And you're seeing, I think we're going to end up seeing a pretty different looking offensive line next year.
Yeah, and so I imagine these guys aren't on campus right now, correct? They won't be back until the calendar turns over to January. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so I did see when we were at the introductory press conference for the new coaches last week, I did see a lot of players going into the building. So they probably were on campus. They were definitely on campus last week. But now as we're kind of heading towards Christmas here, I'm imagining they're probably going to be going home here relatively soon if they haven't already.
Okay, because I wonder, with the timing of this, is this something where he's had a conversation with Coach Clements? Has Coach Clements evaluated what he's seen from Trevon Ball and give him an idea that, hey, we don't think you're what we need at right guard? I don't know. Probably, maybe not. I don't know how many conversations they've had or if they've gotten to talk at all. Or if, again, Trevon Ball maybe sees the writing on the wall and says, hey, I just need to go take myself elsewhere. But when you have a change at position coach coming last week, those are legitimate questions to ask about how he decided to come to this decision.
Yeah, well, Shane had all of his exit meetings after the season ended, so that was the case before he had hired any of these new coaches. So that was already set and done. Some guys probably knew right after those meetings what they were going to do. Some guys haven't announced what their intentions are. I think they were also probably waiting to see what these new coaches were going to be. And yeah, you're right. I don't know exactly if Clements and Terrell have had conversations yet, but I think some of these guys just need a fresh start. Let's be honest. I think the entire offensive line, pretty much from top to bottom, probably needs to be. It's a realistic question. Do these guys, how many of these guys are you actually going to be getting back next year? And I think you're okay if most of them left. I really just think you need a clean slate. And Clem did mention in his introductory press conference, everyone's going to get a fair evaluation. just because, I mean, he doesn't know these guys yet. Like, he'll learn about these guys. I'm sure some of them will stay, but I don't think Tro is going to be the last guy from the offensive line to hit the portal. I just think you're going to see a few other guys that probably do need a fresh start somewhere else to play up to their potential.
Yeah, I think you can make the argument that a guy like Shed Surratt coming in and having to play early as a freshman, had his ups and downs, went through his growing pains. I think you can look at him as somebody with a lot of upside potential and somebody you can still mold and continue to develop on the offensive line. I think the biggest question becomes for somebody like Josiah Thompson, right, who took a significant step back in year number 2 as a starter at that left tackle spot. Is that something that Coach Kim looks at and says, okay, I can fix that guy? Or does Josiah Thompson say, I don't know, I don't like the vibe of this guy, I don't like the fit, maybe I need to go somewhere else too? I think that's the one that we're all watching out for to see if he decides to come back or not.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of where he is next year, his junior year is going to be massive. I mean, look, he played pretty well as a freshman, and then, as we all know, this year took a massive step back. I don't know what happened with him this year. He started every game, but just did not play at all like the player he was last year. That also was a all freshman performer, like Ball was. So you're kind of hoping he can figure it out. The other question I have is, before getting hurt, I think Casey Henry was your best offensive lineman this season before getting hurt in that Missouri game. Can you get him back healthy, and can you get him to return to South Carolina? Because I think he's a nice guy to have at the right tackle position, very smart football player, knows what he's talking about. I just think besides those few guys like Shed, Josiah, and then Kaysen, I really think you would be okay losing some of these other guys you have on the offensive line. They just did not provide you that value you were looking for this season. And I think that's the harsh reality here.
So what do we qualify this as? Because, again, we talk so much about Wes's coined phrase of healthy transfers, as in guys that, weren't high-level contributors or starters on your team that decide to go, just depth more than anything else. Those are to be expected. And a lot of the guys that have transferred out already or are planning to transfer out already fall into that category. Like, Trevon Ball did start 11 games for you this year, but again, the production wasn't what you wanted, so I don't think we can call it a healthy transfer because he was a starter, but it also is somebody that I don't think you're looking at saying, oh my God, I can't believe we lost Trevon Ball, whatever we're going to do, because I feel like the hope and optimism is that you can go out and land somebody to play that position better than he did this year.
Of all the transfers South Carolina's had so far, this is probably the most high-impact guy because he started more games than the rest of the transfers probably combined. That said, starting games is one thing. Playing well and being an impact guy is a totally different thing, and not to say that he's not. It sounds like Tro's a really hard worker from all the interviews that have gone on this year, hearing Shane talk very highly of him, putting in a lot of work to get his body right. But at the end of the day, you got to go out there and play well. And if it's a mixed bag or anything less, it's just not going to cut it, especially the SEC. Like, you're bringing Lenora Sellers back probably with the promise that this offensive line will be significantly better in 2026. And the way to make sure it's going to be better is you have to evaluate everyone on that line, and you got to make some cuts, you got to bring in some new blood, and you got to ensure that he's going to stay upright in 2026. And maybe Tree is just one of those guys that, or Troy, excuse me, that just has to fall out of the picture here.
It is funny. We did used to refer to them as Tree and Tro because they kind of came in as a package, and both had to start pretty quickly as freshmen back in 23. Yeah, they're buddies too.
Yeah, I wonder what Tree will do now, but we'll that's another topic for another day, I guess, whenever that happens.
Yeah, and this is the second offensive lineman into the portal for Carolina. Nick Sharp did that about 2 weeks ago, and he started in about 5 games for Carolina this year. So a couple of guys that have started on your offensive line heading to the portal. We'll see how many more guys decide to make that same decision, and obviously what South Carolina can get out of the portal coming up when the portal officially opens in January. We'll come back and we'll wrap up the hour. It's a Would You Rather Wednesday, and Jack being our resident film buff, I have a very important question to ask him about some characters in Christmas movies. With that coming up next to wrap up the hour, it is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry on your Wednesday on the Game. All right, welcome back in. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher wrapping up the hour here on your Wednesday on the Game. We'll get into more of the best and worst today of college football coming up in hour number 2. But for those that don't know, Jack is our resident film expert here at 107.5 The Game. I believe I saw you posted a question on the Insiders Forum the other day about debating Home Alone 1 or Home Alone 2. How did that conversation go?
Well, I brought it up because me and my brother were watching both movies this past weekend. It's a tradition that one of us cannot watch the Home Alone movies during Christmas time without the other.
Okay.
So it's a pretty serious thing. So I watched both movies, and I'm like, as I've gotten older, I think I've come around to the fact that Home Alone 2 is just a better movie than the first one. So
Okay.
I wanted to get other people's opinion on it, and it seems pretty split, although I think some people do feel Home Alone 2 is one of those sequels that's just better than the original.
Rarely does a sequel rival an original. I will say Home Alone 2 Lost in New York definitely gives Home Alone 1 a run for its money. I don't know. I'd have to really sit and think about it on where I fall in that debate, but I don't think you can be wrong either way. You know what I mean?
No, you definitely can't be wrong. You could look at it as like some of the things in the second movie are eerily similar to the first, but I just think the humor is better in the second one. I think the characters are better. I just think being in New York is such a better setting than being at a house in Chicago. But that's just my opinion.
So, no debate that the Home Alone series, and we don't recognize anything past Home Alone 2. I know they made 3, 4, 5, 7, 15, and all that. We only recognize the ones Macaulay Culkin was in. No debate that those are Christmas movies. However, there is a debate. Jack Veltri, is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Yes, Die Hard is without question a Christmas movie. If you want to debate me on that, you can, but you will be wrong. Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Thank you. My wife had never seen it before, and the other week, on one of the Fridays or whatever, I was like, all right, let's watch Die Hard. I forgot it was like 2.5 hours, but I was like, let's watch Die Hard, and she enjoyed it, but she would not recognize it as a Christmas movie. She said it was more of a movie that took place at Christmas, which, like, I can respect that. I can respect that. But I think a lot of people will contend that it is indeed a Christmas movie. That, it's not the main point of the movie, but it does, it does have a theme of Christmas around it. And I asked this question because I want to ask you this. For Would You Rather Wednesday, would you rather be Kevin from Home Alone or John McClane from Die Hard? As in, like, living the reality of what they did in those movies.
Oh, man. That's a fantastic. That's the best question I'll get all day. Man. I don't know. Here's the thing. If you're Kevin McAllister, you are living the life. Your parents are super rich, living in a fantastic house. God knows what his dad does. There's rumors out there that he has mob ties. I don't know. I don't know what his mom does. John McClane, on the other hand, I haven't seen Die Hard in a little bit, but if I'm remembering correctly, he works in an office of some sort, living in L.A. I think I gotta go Kevin McAllister on this because life is pretty good, and also Kevin seems to be pretty smart with some of the elaborate booby traps that he comes up with. Though John McClane is not a bad option either.
So McClane is a New York detective. It's just the movie is taking place in LA. It's where his wife works in the building and all that kind of stuff. That's why he is there. But he is himself a police detective. Obviously, McClane endures a lot more of a physical toll than, because, like, Kevin doesn't really, like, get hurt really at any point during either one of the Home Alone movies. Like, it's Marv and Harry that take the blunt of the abuse in those movies.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, all Kevin does is he slips up some ice in the second movie and he gets hung on a door in the first movie. So he didn't really take many hits. But that's the thing about him, is that he's quick on his feet. He's able to be on his own in New York, and then he's able to go to his uncle's random renovated apartment and come up with all these elaborate tricks in the span of what feels like 30 minutes. So he's got the edge for me for sure.
You can always go find, like, a good like fan theory online about certain movies and certain characters. I'm sure there's somebody out there that can spin, and I know Die Hard came out first, but like Kevin McAllister being a younger version of John McClane, just considering their like instinctiveness and quick wit when it comes to figuring out how to combat villains in movies.
The way you could kind of put it is, like you said, Die Hard did come out first. You could say John McClane walked so Kevin could run.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Essentially, but I mean, both movies are absolutely fantastic. I've seen Home Alone far more than Die Hard, but still, both are absolutely classic Christmas movies.
Home Alone is a much easier. Home Alone, for one, you can get more people into watching it. This is an easier watch. Like, there's a lot of people that will look at Die Hard and watch like the first 10 to 20 minutes and be like, this ain't really for me. You have to commit to watching Die Hard, where Home Alone is something that can be more casually observed in like the background when you got people over or having Christmas or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but Die Hard, man, it's got John McClane, you got Alan Rickman as the villain. Like it's a great movie, honestly. But Home Alone has better appeal, I think.
Okay.
But don't get me wrong, like people that love those 80s action movies, Die Hard's the way to go for sure.
Yeah, I love 80s movies in general, and Die Hard is probably towards the top of the list of best of all time in my opinion. So just wanted to ask your thoughts on that for Would You Rather Wednesday. We'll dive into the best and worst of college football in 2025 coming up next as we get into hour number 2. It is The Extra Point. He is Jack Belcher. I'm Tyler Head on your Wednesday here on The Game. Tyler here for our friends over at Twin Peaks. Christmas is next week, and if you are scrambling to try and figure out what to put in somebody's stocking, well, how about a holiday bonus card from our friends over at Twin Peaks? Because the season of giving starts with getting, and Twin Peaks can give you if you buy a Twin Peaks holiday bonus card, they'll hook you up with a bonus card just for you, because giving feels great, but getting rewarded for it feels even better. And you can share the gift of crave-worthy food, ice-cold 29-degree draft beers, and good times at Twin Peaks with one of their holiday bonus cards, and treat yourself while you're at it. Of course, with all this great sports action going on in the month of December, only one place to take it all in, and that's our friends over at Twin Peaks. Pull up a bar stool, grab some delicious food, get one of those 29-degree draft beers, and take in all the great action with our friends over at Twin Peaks. Eats, drinks, and, of course, scenic views. Welcome back in. Hour number 2. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Felcher along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Of course, we're still processing last night's loss for men's basketball, 68-61, as they fall to Clemson in the Upstate and drop to 0-4 against quad 1 and 2 opponents. Of course, they won't get another opportunity against any of those until they get into conference play coming up here in a couple weeks, but definitely got a lot of things they need to figure out before that happens to try and get the season back on track and try and make any kind of run at the NCAA tournament. But definitely going to have their work cut out for them when that starts.
Yeah, it all starts with conference play beginning on January 3rd. And we know how tricky that's going to be, Tyler. It's an 18-game gauntlet. The SEC may not be what it was last year, but still, it's certainly very good this year. And it's going to be tricky for South Carolina. So a lot of things to figure out in such minimal time with only 2 more non-con games left to go against SC State and Albany. And then the real games will be here before you know it.
So we've been doing this all week with our best and worst of the year. On Monday, we did best and worst of South Carolina football. Yesterday, we did best and worst of other South Carolina sports not involving football. Today, I want to focus in specifically on college football. First of all, like overall, Jack, how much have you enjoyed, and this is removing the specific Carolina aspect of this, how much have you enjoyed the 2025 college football season so far? That's still not done. Still got playoffs and a champion to crown, and at this point, I have no idea who that's going to be. How much have you enjoyed this season?
Yeah, when you take out the South Carolina part of it, it's definitely a little bit better, I would say. You know, overall, I've enjoyed it. I wish I got to watch more this season, but, you know, with covering this team and whatnot, it is a little bit tricky to watch all the games that are going on, but definitely another good season overall, and I'm looking forward to the playoff beginning here this weekend.
And, you know, last year we talked so much about the chaos and you know, number one teams losing and ranked teams losing to unranked teams. It just kind of seemed like last year was ripe for chaos, and this year has been the same kind of way to the point where, and it makes a lot of sense because the talent is being spread out a lot more with the portal and all that kind of stuff. We see teams like Indiana that, you know, hey, when you have the resources and you have the right head coach, you can suddenly become a power in college football. I think we're going to be dealing with chaotic seasons every single year. And college football in and of itself has always been chaotic, but it really feels like these past 2 seasons have kind of taken it up to another level. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this year just like I did last year.
Yeah, no, it's been chaotic this year. Probably not as much parity as last year. It's hard to top what happened last year with just the amount of crazy losses you would see with top teams getting upset, but definitely another good season for sure.
As we get into the best of college football in 2025, you know, again, the caveat being the season's not quite over yet, but from what we've seen through the regular season, at least conference championships, I wanted to put a game of the year in here, and I went back and forth on a lot of different games because there have been so many phenomenal games this season. I think you can make an argument that Penn State and Indiana was maybe the game of the year. Georgia and Tennessee, Georgia and Alabama, at Texas A&M and Notre Dame. But I ended up settling on, for one of my best, Oregon and Penn State. Maybe the game of the year. Now, Oregon dominated a lot of that game. Penn State had to come back to tie it and send that game into overtime. But when you consider it going into overtime, 2 overtimes at that, it being the backdrop of the whiteout, and this was before, obviously, they fired James Franklin and all that kind of stuff, but the stakes in that game for both sides were insanely, insanely high. Oregon having to travel across the country, like, ew, that might be game of the year, Jack.
That's a very good one. I think looking back at it, yeah, I would say at the time it was huge. I mean, College Game Day was there. But that was before Penn State fell off a cliff this season and managed to somewhat rectify some things by getting to a bowl game this year. But, yeah, I mean, look, at that time, the stakes were super high. It was a whiteout, so I don't blame you for going with that. That's a huge game right there. I'll go with the game in a little bit as I kind of think about it, but right now, the thing that sticks out to me is just 2 things. I'll start with number 1, the story of Fernando Mendoza this season. Man, what a cool story he is. Coming from Cal, transferring to Indiana and just immediately having a fantastic season to where he won the Heisman Trophy. I mean, this was a year where I don't think, like any other year, Mendoza probably doesn't win this award. But since nobody really head and shoulders stood out, it made sense why Mendoza edged out Pavia to win this award. But what a cool story he was this season, and he'll still have a chance to play for a national championship coming up here.
And off of that, one of my other points is kind of expanding on the Mendoza thing. Indiana making themselves undeniable, right? Because last year, it was a really cool story, but one that I feel like we could poke holes in kind of easily because Indiana didn't play the toughest schedule when it came to the Big Ten. And when they played against Ohio State, they lost. When they got into the playoff and went on the road against Notre Dame, they lost pretty handily at that. So I don't think we really looked at them as like, oh, that team is truly morphing into a power of college football. I think it was more of, hey, they had one good season. Maybe they got a favorable schedule and then got bounced once they actually got into the playoff, where as in this year, and look, it took a while, right? Because Indiana is not a team that we typically think of, and rightfully so, because they've never been that great, at least in our lifetimes, as a team that you have to take seriously when it comes to football. And I think for a lot of people, Jack, it took all the way until the Big Ten championship the other week for them to really say, wow, this Indiana team is really legit. Now, for me, going on beating Oregon on the road, check that box. When they did that, I'm like, all right, I've seen enough. I know this team's very legit, even better than they were a season ago. But I think everybody finally came to that realization, and that couples with Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman Trophy when they beat number 1 Ohio State, kind of at their own game with a just low-scoring, grinded-out type of game where they had to make big plays there at the end. I think Indiana truly made themselves undeniable this year. And from a just pure story standpoint, that's fantastic.
No, totally. I mean, Indiana, you could say that Mendoza just added to what they were already doing, which I think is a valid point because, this was a team that made the college football playoff last year. But I think they took bigger steps this year because they were able to go out there and go to Oregon and beat a very good Ducks team in Eugene. They were able to smoke Illinois, who was ranked in the top 10 at the time, winning 63-10. I mean, and they beat Ohio State. Like, this team proved in the regular season they are capable of beating quality opponents, which is something they lacked last year, and now that gives them better chances than anyone as the number 1 overall seed in the playoff to go out there and win a title.
What's another one for you?
Kind of going off that with good stories this year, I think Vanderbilt was such an incredible story this season. Winning 10 games. I know they didn't make the playoff. I feel like they definitely got the short end of the stick in a lot of ways. But, look, they lost games to Alabama and Texas. Those were their best games on the schedule, and they lost both. So that's the thing, is Vanderbilt had a great year. Diego Pavia was electric to watch this season. Just a very scrappy, good football team. And we saw that firsthand with South Carolina lost them 31-7 all the way back in September. And I think that's when they kind of left their mark of like, okay, this team is picking up where they left off last year, and they could be even better this year, which has certainly proved to be the case.
One more for me in the best of college football, and this may have kind of gotten lost in the shuffle of how chaotic the season was, but I think we got treated to maybe the best week 1 ever in college football. Tons of high-profile matchups. You had Texas and Ohio State. You had LSU and Clemson. Obviously, we had Alabama and Florida State. Let's see. You had Notre Dame and Miami in that game on that Sunday night. Obviously, South Carolina, Virginia Tech was a big game. I just think from top to bottom, we had probably one of the most enjoyable week 1s of college football that I can ever remember. Now, obviously, what we learned about a lot of these teams as the season went on, in hindsight, maybe it doesn't make that weekend look as great when you look at Clemson and LSU, when you obviously look at Texas and them not quite living up to the hype of what they were supposed to be. Obviously, Notre Dame and Miami, that ended up being for a playoff spot at the end of the day, and then South Carolina, Virginia Tech to end up materializing into much. But at the time, all those games felt huge, and most all of them were really good and really entertaining, too.
No, I agree with you on that. I mean, so for me, I'm gonna try to figure out like which. It's hard to say like which game specifically stood out above the rest as like game of the year, best game. Like I don't truthfully think in good conscience like I could make that pick. Also because, like I said before, I did like being on the road covering this team a lot. It is hard to be able to watch the games that are going on, from a fan's perspective. So tough for me to say. I agree. Week 1 was great for sure. One of the games, maybe this is just recency. I honestly think some of the games of championship weekend were a lot of fun to watch. Like the nightcap of watching Indiana, Ohio State, that game was really great. And then kind of watching the chaos unfold with Duke beating Virginia. I mean, those were 2 great football games right there. And just seeing that unfold to where it's like, only in college football can something like that happen where you have a 5-loss team that is kind of in the playoff picture at season's end as a conference champion. So just, I was probably not the best, pick for the best thing of the year, but I just based off of what I watched recently after the South Carolina season ended, I thought that was 2 enjoyable games right there.
Since you mentioned it, did you see what the ACC is doing next year with its scheduling format as they're kind of moving to 9 games? Have you read up on this?
Oh, I heard a little bit about it, but if you want to refresh for everyone, yeah, go ahead.
So, again, the SEC is moving to a 9-game conference schedule next year. The Big Ten and the Big 12 have been at this for a while, and the only league that was still behind was the ACC, and they a while back announced that they were going to go to a 9-game conference model next year as well. Well, the problem is the ACC only has 17 teams because Notre Dame is active in the ACC in every sport with the exception of football, so that creates a little bit of a scheduling imbalance. So next year, the ACC is going to have 12 teams that will play 9 ACC games, while 5 teams will play 8 ACC games due to what they said is contractual obligations and schedule balance. Now, everybody's going to be required to play 10 Power 4 opponents. So for the teams to play 9 games, they're required to play 1 more opponent that's from a Power 4 out of conference. And if you're a team that has to play 8 games, you have to play 2 Power 4 out of conference opponents. The teams that will only be playing 8 games next year, again, this is from what they deem to be prior obligations and schedule balance, will be Boston College, Clemson, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina. Everybody else in the league, the other 12 teams, will have to play 9 conference games. As if this year didn't end up being enough of a mess with Duke making its way to the ACC championship, I can only imagine the controversy this is going to create next year.
The ACC can't just find one additional team to create balance. I mean, 17 teams is just so strange to look. The reality is you're never getting Notre Dame on board as a full-time ACC member in football. That's never going to happen, I don't think. But you're going for the West Coast to bring in Cal, Stanford, schools like that. I'm sure somebody else out there from anywhere around the country would come play in the ACC. But, I mean, it makes sense, though, with Clemson only playing 8 games. They're playing LSU in South Carolina next year. And, a few of those other ACC teams already have the SEC games at the end of the year, like Tech and Florida State.
And in case you're wondering, because I had to check this too, those aren't just the 5 teams that are playing Notre Dame, because there's that scheduling thing where Notre Dame plays 5 ACC opponents every single year. It's not those 5 teams. They will play Boston College and they will play North Carolina, but it's not all of them. So that's not the reason for why that's happening. Well, what a mess. What a mess, man.
No, totally. That is college football at its finest.
Well, that might be a highlight for the worst of 2026. We'll get to the worst of college football in 2025 on the other side as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry with you here on your Wednesday on The Game. right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Wednesday on the game as we're closing in on the end of 2025, doing our best and worst across all of sports. Today's focus is on college football. We gave the best of CFB in 2025 in the last segment. Now, Jack, it's time to get to the worst. And I think I'll start with one of the fresher headlines of the year in college football. Everything that just happened with Sharon Moore last week. And it was last Wednesday where Sharon Moore went from being the head coach at Michigan, getting paid like $5.5 million a year, to being taken into custody by police, fired, and then arraigned on Friday in one of the most shocking visuals I've seen in college football in a long time. A guy that only days prior was giving a presser previewing the Citrus Bowl to being in a white jumpsuit, hearing about charges being levied against him.
That's got to be number one of the worst things to come out of this football season. It's really sad. It's a tragic, horrible story, and I see he's out on bail now. I saw a photo of him and his wife and his kids together. I can't imagine what his wife is going through. I mean, how hard it is to have to go through this, but right before Christmas too. It's just a terrible, sad story, Tyler.
Is that also your number one?
That is my number one. To make that clear, yes, it has to be number one. That is the story right now.
Looking at other things around college football, this is more relevant here in the past couple weeks as well. The committee kind of making it up as they go along. I mean, the biggest debate when it came to Selection Sunday a couple of weeks ago was Notre Dame and Miami, right? And I think both fan bases were going to have the opportunity to feel miffed no matter what the committee decided, because if you kept in Notre Dame, then head-to-head didn't matter because those two teams played in week number one, and Miami obviously won that game, and Notre Dame didn't, for two teams that had identical records. But at the same time, now I don't agree with the way that Notre Dame went about reacting to this by canceling or by denying their bowl bid to the Pop-Tarts Bowl. But they were also being told for a solid month that they were ahead of Miami, regardless if we agreed with it or not. That's what the committee was saying. And then they had the rug pulled out from underneath them at the last second on Selection Sunday. Like this committee thing is so infuriating at times. And it's almost like they're messing with us with some of the things that they do and the answers they give on why they make those decisions. It's just like we're getting to a point where this is getting just ridiculous at the end of the day. I don't know if it ever goes away with 16 or whatever we end up expanding this playoff to, but this year really highlighted just how much they seem to be making it up as they go along.
I'm also going to make that my number two on the worst of college football in 2025. It's hard not to. Like, same thing with the whole Sharon Moore situation here. Like, the playoff committee has to be included on this list just because of what you just said right there. It's a debacle. It's that last show to announce the full playoff field, and hearing Hunter Yurachek, the AD at Arkansas, the playoff chair this year, talking about how he had everyone go back and watch the tape on the Miami Notre Dame game, and then they decided that the head-to-head was too much to overlook. That should have been a factor from the start. Miami should have probably always been ranked ahead of Notre Dame, because then I don't think you're having this much of chaos afterwards. I think you still get Notre Dame going to a bowl game at the end of the day, because I don't think it's as tough of a blow, but it's like, hey, they were in the playoff field heading into championship weekend, and then when both teams don't play, Notre Dame gets left out for Miami, who also didn't play during championship weekend. So it's tough. I don't like that Notre Dame opted out, but I also understand why they did it, because they feel like they got screwed, and in some ways they did, but I don't know. The committee's a mess right now with some of the decisions they're making. I think they ultimately got it right. We'll see, but the way they got there was the problem.
And I'm hoping this leads to changes. I don't know what those changes are. just being more upfront about the decision-making process. Maybe we finally get a camera in the room, right? I mean, we see the clips of them sitting there debating, no sound. We don't know what they're talking about, but like, my goodness, if they would live stream these like meetings they have about the top 25 rankings every single week, I guarantee you a lot of people would watch, including myself, because I'd love to know what those debates are. And again, the further down the road we get with this, the more clouded we get on what exactly they're looking at and how exactly they're coming to these conclusions. So I'd love more clarity on that.
The last thing I'll go with here is another big topic in college football, the mass exodus of coaching firings this year. It's, Tyler, I can't remember a year where I've seen this many coaches get canned. It's truly insane how quickly teams were ready to move on from their coaches. Virginia Tech, Penn State fired their coaches what feels like ages ago. And then so many schools followed after that. And I think we're in this era of college football now with all the other problems in the sport of we've seen what Kurt Cignetti did at Indiana. And I think it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because now it sets a precedent that, hey, you can turn around your program in a year, right? Indiana can do it, so why can't we? The problem is not everyone's Kurt Cignetti, and not everyone is Indiana, right? Like,
Sure.
I think you're in a lot of problems now where you're going to see programs have little to no patience, less than they already do, of firing coaches after a year or two and not giving them the time to properly build a program. But, you know, you have the Cignetti example out there now of look what he did in 1 year with a program that had been nothing in football. So just seeing so many coaches getting fired this year, right or wrong, it's definitely kind of a bit mind-blowing, to be honest.
Well, I think it's kind of a best and worst thing because it's best from like a, wow, I can't believe this is unfolding, and when your coach is not involved, you can kind of sit back and watch it all happen. But I think it's also worse because you have a lot of programs that got into situations and say, oh, I didn't realize this was going to be how many schools we're competing against to try and find our next head coach. And I'm sure some schools didn't exactly end up with the guy that they thought they were going to. My last point here for worst of college football in this year, the insane expectations set upon Arch Manning, right? And here's the thing. He had a perfectly good season. Like, it ended up being fine at the end of the day, but the expectations were so sky high. We look at what he did this year in his first 4 years as a starter and say, oh, that's not good enough. That's disappointing. And he's coming back next year to run it back again. But, you know, and he even said as much as media days, like, I don't know where all this hype is coming from. And I think we all got caught up in it because it just got talked about so much. But we didn't know enough about Arch Manning to put the position of the greatest college football player of all time on his shoulders when he hadn't proven anything yet.
It's the expectations were ridiculous coming into the year. He still had a pretty good year, made it work out by the end, but to some people it's probably not good enough considering all the hype and buzz around him. And, you know, he seems like a nice kid. It sucks for him that those expectations were placed on his shoulders, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, he made the most of it and ended up having a pretty good season, and we'll have a chance to go out on a high note this season heading into next year with the Citrus Bowl coming up.
Yeah, that Citrus Bowl is going to be quite a game of headlines, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait to watch that one.
Biff Poggi coaching Michigan, Arch Manning coming back for another year at Texas. Yeah, that's going to be a game to watch coming up here at the end of the month. We'll take a trip over into the NFL coming up next, hit some of the headlines, and discuss our NFL top 5 and bottom 5 as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri here on your Wednesday on the Game.
Are you a small business owner, a church, or other entity in need of a new HVAC system? Well, AAA Heating and Air has exciting news for you. AAA now offers financing to qualified organizations to aid them in installing a new light commercial HVAC system. It's as easy as calling AAA Heating and Air for a quote or finding them online at callAAAtoday.com. At AAA, they've got your back. They're offering up to 12-month payment plans on repairs with no credit check. That's right. No need to worry about your credit score. As long as you're a homeowner with a valid bank account, you'll be good to go. Take control of your comfort today by giving a call to AAA Heating and Air at 803-677-1500. Again, the number to call AAA is 803-677-1500, and breathe easy again.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. As we do each and every Wednesday, we take a look at our NFL Top 5 and Bottom 5, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, we start things off with Who Sprung a Leak, brought to you by our friends over at American Leak Detection. And, Jack, I know you were watching this game pretty closely. The Patriots up 21-0, and they blow the lead against the Buffalo Bills. 35-31 the final score. Patriots, a winning streak comes to an end as they sprung a leak at home on Sunday.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, that has to be our sprung a leak for this week. I mean, 21-0 at home, a chance to clinch the division in a T-shirt and hat game. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the Bills proved to be a good second-half team and come back to win and upset the Patriots in Foxborough.
And obviously that was a big game from the standpoint, too, like you said, of being able to clinch the division. Now Buffalo still with an opportunity to jump up there and get them in these last couple of weeks, though the Patriots do still have the advantage if they continue to win out at this point in time. Speaking of the playoffs, though, we now know Kansas City will not be part of it. They dropped to 6-8 on Sunday after the loss to the Chargers. They also lose Patrick Mahomes in the process with the torn ACL. But for the first time in over a decade, the Kansas City Chiefs will not be partaking in the postseason. Does that make you more or less excited to watch the playoffs this year?
I am far more excited knowing that the beast that is the Kansas City Chiefs are not going to be in the playoff picture this year. Like, honestly, from a Bills fan's perspective, and just an NFL fan perspective in general, these playoffs are going to be probably more entertaining than the last few years just because it's always been the Chiefs playing for the Super Bowl. I mean, the AFC is going to be wide open this year. Like, you could potentially see a playoff without Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, definitely not the Bengals and Joe Burrow. I mean, like, you're talking about some of the top quarterbacks in the AFC that are not going to be in the playoffs this year. I'm probably forgetting somebody else right now. But right now, I mean, like, the Bills, with Josh Allen's experience, they might not win the division, but they're definitely going to have a leg up over some of the other teams in the AFC just due to the experience they have in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think your perspective as a Bills fan, obviously that bodes a whole lot better for you because that's been obviously the Achilles heel for the Bills, for the Ravens, as great years as Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson have. They just haven't been able to get over that Kansas City hump in the postseason. And by the way, this will be the first time since 2019 that the Chiefs or the Bengals will not be in the Super Bowl. Obviously, the Bengals went and came up short of the Rams, and all the other ones since then have been Kansas City winning or losing like they did a season ago. And obviously, if the Patriots don't manage to make the Super Bowl, here's the thing. If the Patriots or Broncos don't manage to make the Super Bowl, this will be the first time since 2013 when the Ravens won that the Broncos, Patriots, Chiefs, or Bengals are not the representative for the AFC in the championship.
I am perfectly okay with that. That sounds great to me. Gives the Bills a much better chance to get to the Super Bowl this year and potentially win it.
So let's dive into our NFL top 5 now, and we'll keep it right there in the AFC. And I'll go with the Denver Broncos because with the Patriots falling to the Bills on Sunday, that means the Broncos are the only one with a long win streak still going 11 in a row. They beat one of the best in the NFC in the Packers to do that, and they also clinched one of 2 berths in the playoffs so far with a couple weeks left to go in the regular season.
I'm with you as well. I had my doubts about the Broncos, but they beat a really good Packers team, and you got to move them to number 1 as a result of the Patriots losing. The Broncos, I think the jury's still going to be out until the playoffs get here, but I think right now I could definitely say this is a good football team with a good defense. Bo Nix is playing really well, and you've got some nice weapons for him to work with.
Number 2 for me, the other team that's also clinched a playoff berth this time, that being the Los Angeles Rams. They had to overcome an early deficit to the Lions on Sunday, came back, won that game. Do have a concern with the Devontae Adams injury ahead of tomorrow night's game against the Seahawks. We'll see what his availability by the time that game rolls around is. By the way, what a phenomenal Thursday night game we're going to get between those two teams. But we've talked about it already. I mean, Matt Stafford may very well win the MVP this year. They're playing at an elite level, and the NFC seems like it's going to run through the LA with the Rams once again.
Yeah, the Rams are my number 2 as well. What a matchup we'll get on Thursday in Seattle between 2 really good teams that ultimately could end up deciding the division with whoever wins this game. So definitely a huge game for both sides. For the Rams, playing better football since that Panthers loss back at the end of November. And Matt Stafford, I think right now, you look at him, even though he's 37 years old, he's looking like the NFL MVP at this current moment.
Number 3 for me will be the New England Patriots. Despite losing on Sunday, they still won 10 games in a row, which is extremely impressive. Now, again, the win on Sunday could have bought them a little bit more of a buffer and clinched the division there. Didn't obviously end up happening, but still in very good shape to win the division if they continue to win out to close out the year. And again, Drake May still very much in the running when it comes to the MVP race as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Seahawks at number 3. I'm going to have the Patriots drop a few spots just because of that loss. I know they've been playing well, but I'll get to them in a minute. I mean, the Seahawks, 11-3 right now, playing just as well as anyone right now in the NFL. Ever since that loss to the Rams a few weeks back, been playing some really good football now, albeit they have beaten teams that, aren't great. They had a close win over the Colts and Phillip Rivers over the weekend, but this team, defense is nasty, really good team overall.
The Seahawks are going to be my number 4, and you mentioned that tight win against the Colts. Good teams find ways to win, and when your offense can't manage to get in the end zone, well, you turn to the leg of your great kicker, Josh Myers, because he went 6 for 6, including a late game-winning field goal to put them over the Colts on Sunday. Very rarely do you see a team make nothing but field goals and win, but that's what the Seahawks did on Sunday. And again, huge matchup tomorrow night taking on the Rams.
Number 4 for me, I had a little bit of a debate on this. This may have some bias going into it. I'm going with the Buffalo Bills at number 4. I like the way they've been playing. Defensively, they were not great in that first half, but they definitely stepped it up in the second half, got some key stops at the end of the game to beat the New England Patriots. Josh Allen, I think he's working himself into this MVP conversation. If he can, I think he's the most valuable player in the NFL simply because the Bills would not be anywhere near the playoffs without him. Like, Matt Stafford's got some really nice weapons. He's got Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, you name it. Josh Allen does not have that. Like, Khalil Shakir might be his best receiver. Like, they really don't have those top guys, but they make it work and find a way. So I got the Bills moving up to number 4 after a huge win in Foxborough.
I got the Bills as my number 5. They did end the Patriots' win streak. Look, the rush defense is still not good, and the Patriots did manage to run all over them on Sunday, but when Josh Allen is playing at the level that he is right now, he can overcome. He can mask a lot of those inefficiencies defensively. And again, they may have to win games 38-35, but they're still winning them at the end of the day. So I think Josh Allen's play can elevate even a struggling defense in certain areas. So Bills are my number 5.
Lastly, I got the Patriots at number 5. I know, dropping them 4 spots after losing a game at home. But look, they blew a 21-0 lead. I think that's the main thing that stands out to round out this conversation. They had a chance to clinch the division at home. They're still a very good team, one of the best in the NFL. I'd argue they're probably a little bit better than the Bills at this moment. But after seeing the way these two teams played on Sunday, the Bills are still very much alive in this division. And ultimately, I think they're going to end up winning it. I think the Patriots probably lose one more game the rest of the way, but this will still be a dangerous team to take on in the playoffs.
We will discuss the NFL bottom 5 as well as the future of Tua in Miami. Coming up next as we wrap up the hour, it is The Extra Point. It's our head and Jack Feltry with you here on your Wednesday on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour ahead, and Jack Beltry along with you here on your Wednesday, wrapping up hour number 2. And, I made that tease a second ago because I already had this on the rundown to talk about, because after the Monday Night Football game against the Steelers, Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel did say they were open to maybe making a move and putting Tua on the bench. But quite literally, as I went into that break, I got the notification on my phone from ESPN that, yes, indeed, Jack, the Dolphins are benching Tua Tagovailoa in favor of Quinn Ewers starting for them going forward.
This just makes the most sense. I'm glad this is going to happen. Look, you got 3 games left to go. The Dolphins are out of the playoffs. Tua turned the ball over. Has not been as advertised this season. I mean, the Dolphins have been playing better as of late, but now that they're out of the playoffs, I think you got to focus on the future here and see what you got with Quinn. You never know what can happen. I mean, he was a late-round pick, had some success in college, was not amazing at Texas last year, threw a lot of interceptions, but I think it's time to see what he can do. Zach Wilson is your other backup, but we know what he is. And I think it's time to figure out what you got here in Ewers as you head into a pivotal offseason here in Miami.
Yeah, obviously the hope when Mike McDaniel came in was he was going to get the most out of Tua, and we did see a couple of really strong seasons, but when it comes to the injuries and obviously the regression this year, it was ultimately time to make a move. Now, they have a lot of money tied up into going forward, as they did sign that extension back at the beginning of 2024. So if they can manage to trade him and let somebody eat most of that money, then they'll be in good shape. But if not, they're going to have a lot of money potentially sitting on their bench next season as they try and figure out their quarterback situation.
I think you got to dump him off. I think you have to find a way to do that, but I wonder who's going to eat that contract, and I don't know. It's, again, these are things that you have to figure out as the season ends.
$54 million guaranteed for next year, by the way.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, you might have been worth it, but right now, definitely not.
Real quick, we'll kind of fly through our bottom 5 here as we wrap up the hour. No surprise, kind of the usual suspects. Jets, another blowout loss as they fall to the Jags, are going to be my number 28. I'll go with the Browns at number 29 as they got drugged by the Bears. And Shedeur Sanders lost his play-calling wristband. That's just a microcosm for what the Browns are. I don't know what is. 30 for me, Raiders. Not only did they get shut out by the Eagles, they had 75 total yards of offense, Jack. That is not acceptable on any level in the NFL. And, of course, the Giants and the Titans, my number 31 and 32, having already fired their head coach. Again, we're in December. Only 2 teams that have fired their head coach right now. I would have lost that bet if we were taking that back in September.
I'm surprised we own more at this point. There are a lot of teams that probably should fire their coaches. Number 28 for me, speaking of coaches that should be fired, I think Kevin Stefanski. I think he's got to go after this season. It's been miserable in Cleveland this year, so Browns are going to be my 28 after a abysmal performance against the Chicago Bears. Number 29 is going to be the Arizona Cardinals. Got spanked by the Rams this weekend. They've been out of playoff contention for a few weeks. Just talk about underperforming on every single level. That's another team right there that has a pivotal offseason ahead as they try to figure out what they're going to do next. As they're tied up as well with quarterback money with Kyler Murray. Number 30, Vegas Raiders. Not much more to be said. I think the hiring of Pete Carroll turned out to be a massive mistake. Seems like nobody's admitting that right now, but we'll see what happens at season's end, whether they decide to keep Pete or not as he continues to only get older. And then, of course, same as usual, number 31, the New York Football Giants, and then at 32, the Tennessee Titans.
As we head into these last couple weeks of the regular season, 13 teams already eliminated from playoff contention. Again, the Chiefs are the headliner of that with their loss this past weekend to the Chargers. But it is really funny because if we would have gone back to like August before the season started and I told you the Panthers would still be alive in the playoff race when the Chiefs weren't, you wouldn't have believed me. You might not also believe me about that with the Colts either, because we never saw the Danny Dimes thing coming out again. We'll see what they can do in the last couple weeks with seemingly Phillip Rivers manning the ship for the final couple weeks of the regular season. But both those teams obviously still alive when you have, like, the Chiefs, the Bengals, and I know that's mainly due to Joe Burrow's injury, the Vikings, like these other teams that we thought might have been in the mix for playoff spots, already done, and we're not even at Christmas yet.
Yeah, going to be a big few weeks coming up for the Panthers, who play the Buccaneers 2 of the next 3 weeks. I mean, these next 3 games going to decide the division for both those teams. So I think the Panthers really blew a golden opportunity to kind of get get a little bit of an edge in this division. But when you lose to the Saints twice, you can kind of argue maybe they don't deserve to win the division. The problem with the Panthers is that they've been too inconsistent this year. Some weeks they're great, other weeks they're not. I don't know what that means. Maybe they'll get hot at the right time if they make the playoffs, but they're going to have to do it as a division winner at this point. And yeah, the Colts, tough loss for them on Sunday. I thought they were going to win it after they got that big kick, after driving down the field, and then Jason Myers, shout out Maris, went down and got the go-ahead game-winning kick. I mean, just a backbreaker for the Colts. But with Phillip Rivers, they don't look terrible, but I think it's going to be hard for them to make the playoffs at this point, just considering you're probably getting a pair of the Chargers and Bills in the playoffs at 10-4 right now. That's the Colts are 8-6. I mean, it's tough to come back from that.
But you know what? Shout out to Phillip Rivers at 44 years of age, the second grandfather to play in the NFL. Did throw a touchdown pass. It did come up short, but a grandfather, an active high school football coach, did start an NFL game on Sunday, and seemingly going to be starting coming up this weekend in his second game as well. So he survived, and we'll see how far he can take the Colts for however long he's going to start for them.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that over the last few weeks. If there's any reason to watch the Colts, it's that right there.
There you go. I believe they're on Monday night this week, if I remember correctly. So all the more reason to tune in.
Monday night against the 49ers.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Jack, we'll see you in here tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow.
We'll jump back into what happened on the hardwood last night coming up as we get into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, up next on your Wednesday on the Game. 11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you here. Got plenty of things to get to, some more news in the transfer portal for Gamecock football. But, of course, we have to start with what happened last night in the Upstate. It's been a really tough year for men's sports, guys. There's no denying that. We were hoping maybe one little shred of optimism going into the holidays, if you could at least beat your rival in the Upstate on the hardwood, and well, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Carolina falls 68-61 and kind of an ugly, sloppy slog of a game for both sides, really, as this men's basketball season continues to compound into more frustration, given it's only 11 or so games in. But last night was another tough one for Lamont Paris's crew.
Yeah, it was. And, I think we've seen, even in some down years, we've seen South Carolina play pretty well and compete against Clemson's basketball team, and this one just was fairly ugly from the start. I know South Carolina had an early lead, but once again, a team that I think we all believed was being built around bringing in shooters and guys that can just all kind of spread defenses out and hit shots. And once again, I felt like just at times they were getting open shots. They just have not fallen. That's been the story of much of this year. And, didn't quite as have the problems in terms of rebounding in the paint and stuff, especially the first half that we've seen from this team in other games, but just continue again to not be able to hit outside shots.
So if we go back to the preseason when this team was constructed, South Carolina kind of went all in on let's rebuild this team, right? Because, and that's fair because it didn't go well last year. You couldn't come in and say, let's bring back the same guys, make another run at it. They rebuilt this team. You bring back Michi Johnson. You go to the portal. You bring in a substantial number of guys from the portal to kind of mix in with some of the younger guys, a Hayden Assemian, for instance, that's on your team that you're trying to develop. And they constructed this team. Lamont Paris talked about this a little last night after the game because, the SEC has a bunch of teams that shoot, right? Shoot a lot of threes. And when you looked at the roster composition, you got the sense that this is probably a team that's going to shoot a lot of threes, right? Even, Norden Kapich, Kreist, most of the times you look on the floor, Jordan Butler, who came back, not a guy from the portal this offseason, but a guy from the portal the previous season. A lot of times you look around on the floor and you go, okay, all these guys can shoot. That's part of their game. But what was the concern there? Well, number one, we thought, and this played out early in the season, this is a team that's probably going to be overly reliant on shooting threes. And so what that means is if you go cold, you're going to struggle, because especially once you haven't even gotten into conference play, but once you get in, the rebounding problems that you talked about, Wes, defensively, there seems to be some limitations. On the positive side, or the potential positive side, you could see some games where South Carolina gets hot. Maybe it's Michi Johnson in the Michi go-off game that Wes talks about. Maybe it's Miles, maybe it's somebody else. But point is, they've got a bunch of guys that, not even just in theory, it is part of their game that they can shoot from the outside. The problem is they have strung together against high major opponents, all of them, shooting performances from outside where they were overly reliant, because that's how this team's built, and they just haven't shot well enough. I mean, that was the case last night. It's been the case in all the other losses for the entirety of the season. So last night, go through the stats real quick, take 26 threes. Clemson took 14. You took 26 threes. You only made 4. Not going to be good enough. You look at the Northwestern game. Close game. Doesn't count. You lost. Lose by 2. You took 34 threes. You made 10. Look at the Butler game. You took 26 threes. You made 7. You look at the Virginia Tech game. Had a chance there at the end. Didn't get a shot off. Goes into overtime. You lose. You were 8 of 29. So what's the theme? Very high volume of threes taken. Very low volume of threes made from a percentage standpoint. That's how this team's constructed. It could be, I think we're all sitting here going, will this team be favored in an SEC game? Maybe not at this stage. Could they have a game or two or multiple games where they suddenly get hot from three and they start upsetting some people? Maybe, but the problem is that has not hit yet, and it hasn't hit against teams that aren't even going to be to the level of competition, frankly, that they're about to see pretty soon.
And it's not just the fact that you're taking these high number, and Clemson is a team that did contest quite a few last night, but even when you got a lot more of your open looks, you were still missing on a majority of those as well. And again, there will be a night or two in SEC play where things really come together and you probably make, 40, 50% of them. Maybe that's a game you win. Maybe that's a game that you pull an upset, but that seems like one of those things that's going to be few and farther between than more of a consistent thing, because now you've gone under 30% in 7 games so far this year. That's kind of more telling of what you are, as opposed to kind of an anomaly of having a bad night here and there. And you mentioned Michi. He last night also had a tough game, didn't score until well into the second half. And again, we know he kind of is up and down. That's just who Mitri is. And you'll have the go-off game, then you'll have a game where he only scores 5 points or whatever. But if you ever needed a game for him to just be like decent average, last night would have been it. And maybe you have a few more points and you're in that game a whole lot later. But his poor performance, coupled with everything else that went wrong, led to you losing a 7-point game that really felt like you were trailing by about 20 for most of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it did feel that way. And I think, guys, it's one of those things where unfortunately for South Carolina fans, you're just getting more and more data. Tired of the thought of who is this team? Is this what they are? And, unfortunately, you're getting like more and more evidence. Like, all right, this may be kind of who this team is. And I know that Lamont Paris has talked about like kind of just needing for they were talking during the broadcast about how it's kind of like. When your putts aren't falling and you just kind of need something good to go your way, and you hope that it maybe can snowball in the positive way as opposed to snowballing against you, which is what has happened so far. These guys statistically are better shooters than they have shown, but for whatever reason, just the cohesiveness has not come together. The open shots aren't falling. I don't know if they're pressing. I don't know what it is, but you kind of are very quickly like running out of time to put it together before you do get into SEC play, when it, of course, will get even more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about the way that the team is constructed is, again, it's not like square peg round hole thing from the standpoint of you're banking on this team and you're constructing the team and instructing them, I should say, to shoot a bunch of threes when the guys can't shoot, right? Like, if you put a bunch of guys out there and we're going to shoot a bunch of threes and it's a bunch of guys that can't, like, they all actually have done it throughout their career. It might be maybe not a high volume thing like the bigs. They're not going to be high volume 3-point shooters, but they can step out and make them. They've done it at points in their career. Inconsistently, yes, that's fair. But they just haven't been falling. And now you're stuck in a spot where, this is your team. This is the way it's constructed. It's like Steve Spurrier used to say, can't trade them. So you can't say, well, we're going to kind of overhaul our style, because this isn't a team. Remember Lamont's really good team in 23 that made the NCAA tournament, finished second in the SEC, almost won the SEC. That was we're going to play slow. They could shoot a little bit, right? B.J. Mack could shoot. Talon Cooper could shoot. But they ran the offense through Mack and Cooper. It was a different style. I remember in the Clemson game that year, late, the offense was get the ball to B.J. Mack in the post, let him hold it for about 15 seconds, and maybe back somebody down and put up a high percentage shot, or kick it out and shoot. And like that worked.
Yeah.
This team is not constructed that way. They're constructed to shoot. But and you can't even say they can't. It's like you're stuck between saying, well, they can't shoot. Well, on one hand, they can, because they've got a bunch of guys that have done it in spots during their career. On the other hand, if you say they can't shoot, well, you've got a bunch of box scores that we just ran through that show that they have not shot the ball well. So what gives? Can it improve? And I think the golf analogy is good. Like, can you get it to where you can shoot? That's it's going to have to turn around from that standpoint to improve this thing.
Yeah, and this drops you obviously to 0-4 against opponents in Quad 1 and Quad 2. So you go into conference play coming up here in a couple weeks. You'll play Carolina State, South Carolina State, and Albany to wrap up the year. But you start with Vanderbilt and then go through your onslaught of the SEC with no quality wins to fall back on. And we talked about this going into the year with, how much of a step back last year was after making the tournament, that this team really needed to get itself back on track and at least enter the conversation of making the tournament, maybe for the sake of Lamont Paris' job. We don't know. It's certainly, been a lot more bad than good through, 3.5 seasons so far now. So you're going to have your work cut out for you. And look, the SEC is not as good as it was a season ago, just purely off what we've seen through non-conference so far. So you're probably having to be around 500 in conference play to enter that conversation of being on the bubble. And again, you're going to have to see a lot of things different from this team over the course of the next couple months to believe that they can be in that realm of, being in those conversations come March.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of this is that, frankly, I've watched South Carolina basketball for a long time. This is a fan base that, needs to see something positive happen early on to kind of almost re-energize them every year. And, we've seen CLA at its absolute best at times, and we've seen it when, it's not the most difficult place to play. And so I think that's another maybe just forgotten aspect of why it was going to be important to get off to that exciting start. Like there's been a lot of talk about this being the expectation was that this was going to be a team that was going to be fun to watch, that was going to hit a lot of shots, that was going to be offensive oriented in some sense. We know Paris is always going to preach defense, but that they were not going to be, nearly as offensively challenged as they have been so far. And so I think that's something where, you're not at the end of the year yet, but you are running out of time to kind of let fans see that spark and then respond by going to games and having that energy and being that kind of home field or home court advantage that you want.
Well, the next opportunity to play will be coming up on Mondays. They'll take on South Carolina State. I believe Monday also starts when they have free concessions at the games to round out the year as well, so you can go check that out starting on Monday. And we do have 2 family 4-pack tickets to give away to callers number 4 and 5 right now at 803-404-6100. You'll see Coach Barris' team return home on Monday taking on South Carolina State. We have news from the transfer portal of another outgoing Gamecock. We'll hit that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. We'll get to the latest news in the transfer portal in just a moment, but real quick, want to let you know, today at 3 o'clock on the postgame show, Coach Beamer will be joining Terry and Jay to give an update on everything that's been going on the past couple days, obviously in the wake of making the hires that he did. And, we're getting set for the portal to open up here coming up in a couple days. Obviously, the news of Lenore Sellers turning towards returning to South Carolina as well. I'm sure will be points of conversation. Again, that's today at 3 o'clock on the postgame show with Terry and Jay. Again, portal opens up coming up on January 2nd, but we know guys have already been declaring their intentions to enter the portal over these past couple weeks. We've had a few for South Carolina already, but the most significant starter up to this point did indeed throw his name out there earlier on today, that being Travon Ball, who started 11 games for South Carolina at right guard this season. A third-year guy will be seeking his playing time elsewhere in 2026.
Yeah, I think obviously this would be your first, starter that you're losing to the portal, just in terms of a guy who has made an impact. And, I think Tro is one of those guys, if you were looking at the roster at the end of the season, could have gone either way in terms of whether you would expect him to be back or not. We know that there are going to be, and we knew that there were going to be, changes on the offensive line. I mean, let's be honest, there just has to be. And so you were probably going, which guys are leaving, which guys are staying. And Tro, to me, is someone who, has at times played well. Do you still need to kind of upgrade that spot where he was at? I would argue yes. Now, when I say that, I think that could be one of two ways. Are you upgrading it by, replacing someone, or are you upgrading it by Tro Ball has now played a bunch, you have a new scheme, you have a new coach, and he just continues to develop? This is a guy that I, could make a pretty good case for, you would still want him on your football team next year. This would also be a guy who, depending on those conversations and what they were about that we're not privy to in terms of rev share and what your percentage of that is going to any one player, you probably are not breaking your back to make sure that he comes back either. And so, I think, again, we all know that this is going to be a pretty new look offensive line next year. And, he will not be the last offensive lineman to hit the portal. I think it's probably pretty safe to say.
Yeah, we've already seen Nick Sharp. Shane Beamer alluded to, and this was a while back, right? This was the early signing day press conference, talking about ongoing at that time exit interviews and didn't mention names, but said, hey, there's already a couple other guys that I've talked to where we kind of mutually agreed it's best to move on. And so he didn't say which position, but the offensive line, you're right, Wes, is one where we've already seen a couple dominoes fall. I think we will see others. That is very safe to say. And when you look at the O-line, you're right. You've got to make some changes there because what happened last season, and frankly, some of the trends that we've seen up front really over the past 5 years, really. Even in 2024, when this was a really good football team that was producing offensively, you were still going, dang, there's still a lot of negative plays. There's still a lot of sacks here. You're still near the bottom of the conference in the country. So when that happens, you have to make some wholesale changes to address that problem. And it's not just personnel. We've seen you're going to have a new O-line coach. You're going to have a different offensive scheme that is going to hopefully help with that in terms of being more, offensive line friendly and quarterback friendly. Some of the sacks that we've seen last season, this past year, some of the other ones over the years, it's not every single sack that you see. If they give up 40 sacks in a year, not every single one's on the offensive line. But schematically, how can you help that? And then it is personnel. It can be all of those things because it has been. So you certainly look at the O-line from last year and go, should this group have been better? And I think you can fairly say yes. But can you also say, hey, they need to upgrade the talent and the depth on this team? I think that's very fair to say too. So you'll see a combination of that. I think where you have to be careful here is not thinking, all right, let's completely blow this thing up. The O-line's been so poor. You don't bring anybody back. Just, let's just go to the portal and get everybody. I think you got to be careful there, right? Because there are some guys that just made this point, Wes, can continue to get better, whether it's with the new scheme and new coaching, whether it's a young guy like Shed Surratt, who was just thrown into the fire as a freshman. And frankly, if you're going in the portal, you run the risk of, you got to evaluate those guys too. You got to hit on them. So I think you have to kind of walk that line and strike that balance.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Tro's a guy I wouldn't have minded. If I'm South Carolina, I wouldn't mind having him back, especially with Nick Sharp leaving and Tro leaving. That's two of your interior guys. It's not lost on me that, Tree didn't play down the stretch of the season. Didn't really play at all the last couple of games. That's not lost on me at all. There are other guys that are going to have decisions to make as well, or maybe fall in those categories Chris was talking about. So with this being a completely new look offensive line to an extent, I don't think you want to completely start over. And building a team or building an O-line completely in the portal, to me, is no way to live.
Well, we've seen it backfire on a lot of teams.
Yes, it's very easy to say, I will go in the portal. I will go in the portal. Not great. And so, I think especially you look at kind of interior guys, you're putting yourself in a position where, you're going to have to go out and for every guy that leaves, you're probably going, well, that's one more spot that you have to fill with somebody coming in. And, I think there are guys you're looking at saying you 1,000% don't want to lose. Shed Surratt maybe is at the top of that list, but we saw Shed play pretty well at right tackle.
Yeah.
I think the more guard guys you lose, are you saying, well, maybe he's more of a guard, maybe he's more of a tackle. Like you're going to have some decisions to make there. I think we already knew they were going to have to go out and get a center. That was something that was going to be a huge priority, but I think one of the most important things for this roster moving forward as we kind of turn it into it is now roster season. Which guys are you looking at and saying, we love you as a person, but it's just not worked out? And which guys are you able to evaluate and say there is still ability here, but now with a new O-line coach, a new scheme, a new everything on that side of the ball, it was brought up something to me yesterday I thought was a great point, actually talking to somebody at the Shrine Bowl. You already had guys that are struggling on the O-line last year, and I'm not picking on anybody, but when you have your center position, the spot that's supposed to keep everybody in unison, the spot that's supposed to keep everybody sort of on the same page, and you're having all these procedural issues from the center position. How much did that just accelerate the problems that were already there on an individual basis? So I think going out and getting the right center to just be that force. I mean, who would have thought maybe Tyler, because it was his favorite player, South Carolina missed for Sean Lee.
Shout out 5'3".
They missed him as much as anybody on that entire roster from the previous year, I think.
Sure. I think this, and we'll get to this on the side, begs an interesting question about what Randy Clements, Coach Clem's going to be able to do here this offseason with what he does have coming back. And we'll get to that coming up on the other side. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris on your Wednesday on the game.
All right, y'all, let's tell you about our friends over at Integrated Media. Playoffs getting ready to start up college football here, December, January. If you want to upgrade your setup at home so you can watch that and all the sports action, even just movies, TV shows, make sure your internet's running in tip-top shape so that you can stream across multiple devices simultaneously. If you're having dead spots with Wi-Fi, if you're getting the dreaded buffering circle of death, you may want to get your Wi-Fi checked out by our friends over at Integrated Media. Michael, Nathan, they can take care of that for you. They can help you trick out that man cave. They can help you with new TVs, wireless speakers, sound bars, Wi-Fi. They can help you upgrade your entire setup at your home. They can even recommend the best equipment for you. They can source it for you. They can advise you on your service providers. They can do it from start to finish. IntegratedMediaInc.com or give Michael, Nathan, Integrated Media a call, 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Again, news from earlier on this morning that Trevon Ball is going to be entering the transfer portal coming up when it opens on January the 2nd. Of course, he spent the past 3 seasons here at South Carolina, started a lot of his freshman year when kind of thrust into action, he and Tree both, due to the injuries on the offensive line that year. Played more of a rotation role last year. Don't believe made any starts a season ago, and then started 11 of 12 games for South Carolina this year. So I guess he wouldn't fall under healthy transfer because of the amount of games that he started, but obviously somebody that, across that entire offensive line, you're looking to upgrade everywhere when you certainly can. And Tro's such an interesting guy here, and we'll see who else decides to transfer out that was also a starter, because you look at somebody like Kim saying, okay, well, he regressed in 3 years or whatever. His third year as a starter compared to his first year, and maybe put a lot of that on Lonnie Teasley. So the question becomes for the guys that are going to stay, Josiah Thompson probably being the biggest one of those, from what we've seen from year number 1 to year number 2 for him, is like, okay, can Randy Clements, because again, you got a room full of talented guys. We know that from how Carolina's recruited out of high school and all that. Can Coach Clem get these guys up to their potential in the offseason? That's something we're not going to know until meaningful games start rolling around. When you start conference play up against Mississippi State halfway through September, and that's, I guess, the hope that these guys that are returning have is, hey, this guy can get me where I need to be, where I can play up to the caliber that I need to survive in this league, because what you saw this year across the entire offensive line was largely unacceptable. So how can he get the most out of those guys that were returning, or for the ones that are leaving, can he fill in those spots with better guys from elsewhere that hopefully can gel together and make an entire unit of 5 work the way we know an offensive line needs to?
Well, and I think that is one of the hardest things about the transfer portal era, too, is for those guys to just kind of gel and to be one unit. And I think that's a position where sometimes you look at an O-line and the sum is greater than each part. Other times you look at an offensive line and it's the opposite of that. And so can you get them to all play on the same page? I do think that's one potential advantage, is the fact that for the first time in a long time, you have an O-line coach who is, he was like born in this system. Like this is what he does. You can go all the way back to, I believe, his high school coaching days, and he was in this system. And, I think that certainly helps. You were talking about an O-line that, they were trying to do one thing to start the year, and then, of course, you had all the changes, and the development wasn't there, and then they were trying to kind of piece together the offense down the stretch, and then there were different guys in down the stretch as well, and it just never obviously fully gelled. And some of that was individual performance, but then some of that was just, the totality of what the O-line is going to give you. And so I think that's something for South Carolina. You need every single one of those individual spots to improve, but you've got to have just the entire unit improve. And I don't think you can expect like world beaters off the bat. But I mean, Chris, I think we even saw a little bit in those games once Fury took over of how you can protect your offensive line to an extent with play calling. And now to me the just absolute most surefire way to know a lot of it was the improved play. It sometimes was because of that, was what happened once Carolina was put in a situation where they had to throw, where they had to pass the football. We saw that protection really start to break down again. And so there are things you can do, but that doesn't fix all your woes. You have to kind of continue to come along as an actual unit. It can't all be smoke and mirrors either.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, most teams in the country, if they're living in the downs and distances that South Carolina was frequently living in this year, you're going to struggle. If you go into the SEC and say, Tyler, you might know this because you track it, but if your average down and distance on third down is like 3rd and 8, which at some points it has been,
yeah,
that's not good. And a lot of the really good teams in this league and nationally are going to struggle if they don't do that. So to your point, Wes, they were able to find some things where they were able to move the football a little bit more, create some, plays to where you're not getting to the 3rd and 8s, the 3rd and 15s. Some of that was schematic, some of it was execution. Frankly, some of it was just being able to cut down on the penalties at points later in the year. That helps you too. You don't want to be starting in 1st and 15 either, because that makes life more difficult on you. So I think, again, it goes to every single part of it. They all work together. Schematically, is this a system that's going to give South Carolina's offensive line a better chance? Because, Shane Beamer says often, and he's absolutely correct, every single week that you line up in this conference, you're playing against NFL dudes. A lot of times you're playing against first-round picks. And you have to be able to stay ahead of the chains a little bit better. You have to be able to create some explosive plays, flip the field more than South Carolina has. But even given that, you go back to personnel. Can they upgrade the personnel? Yes, I think so. Can you develop guys just individually better than they have? Yes. I think you have to do all of those things to make this thing look better.
Yeah. By the way, on the season, their average down and distance was third and 8.25.
Yeah. That's tough.
That matches the eye test.
Yeah.
Is anybody shocked by that number at all?
No. It
whatsoever.
matches up kind of what we saw. And some of that was self-inflicted wounds. How many times do we see them get into a 3rd and 3 and you got a false start or an illegal snap or whatever, and suddenly you're in 3rd and 8, or you take a sack on a 2nd and 5 that turns into a 3rd and 10 or a 3rd and 12. Kind of consistent things throughout the year, and some of that, as you mentioned, is on sellers hanging on to the ball too long and not getting rid of it. Some of it is sometimes on running backs missing blocks. We talked, Jack and I talked yesterday about what happened on the goal line against Missouri, where Faison blew a block and Sellers had a guy right in his face. Now, could he have gotten rid of the ball, after that? Maybe. But it was a storm of everything going wrong at that moment that all culminates into this offense struggling as a whole. Yes, the play calling was still bad. There were reasons other than the blocking up front why Shula ended up getting moved on from, but it certainly didn't help when you had these issues up front with guys not being able to do their jobs effectively throughout the entire year.
Yeah, and I mean, I keep going back to what I said earlier, too. The center position has to get everybody on the same page. And when you're having illegal snaps and false starts from that spot, it just throws everything out of whack. I mean, I think it's a spot where, you need every single area we are talking about to make small improvements to where the overall package is much improved, I think. And, guys, I know, Tyler, you've been around here now some too. Even I can go way, 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 way back. The offensive line has been a constant discussion piece among South Carolina fans for over a decade now. And I'm not saying it's been all bad every single year. It hasn't been. But it has been one of the toughest areas for South Carolina across every sport, I feel like. If you were just going to identify what's been the top 5 most tough thing for South Carolina to solve, one of the things you would mention would be finding consistent offensive line play. And I think we all thought they were headed towards fixing it with the way they were recruiting on paper with some of these high school classes in recent memory, but it just has not happened to this point, quite obviously. And, I mean, we're going to get tired of talking about this. I can already tell you this is December 17th. On August 17th, we're going to be sitting here talking about it, and we're going to be saying, you can just go ahead and play this clip. Yeah, they feel good about some of the improvements they've made, but we're not going to know what it is until we see it against an actual opponent.
I have toyed with a New Year's resolution. You know how, Wes, in the past, we'll get you guys hyped up this or that, and a lot of times that's not actually true. If we say like 2023, we went in, said, hey, I think there's some reason to believe the offensive line will be better than 2023. It was, You mean
2024?
Yes.
From 2023.
From 2023,
yes.
Thank you. Some people took that to mean that we said it was going to be dominant or something, which we never said. And obviously they had some struggles even last year in a really good year. I'm toying with just hardly saying anything, almost taking the I'm going to believe it too when I see it stance, which is, that's tough. I mean, if you hear things, you hear a lot of things in practice, from the team, from sources, and you hear those things and a lot of them turn out to be right. And then sometimes they just don't hit for whatever reason. And the offensive line has been one of those areas where it hasn't a lot of times. So anybody taking let's say they go through and they land a bunch of guys that look great on paper in the portal and you got a new O-line coach and new OC, there's a temptation to be this thing might actually look better. I think a lot of people are taking the approach of let's just see, and I don't blame anybody who takes that stance either.
And it's not just the offensive line that creates the issues on this offense. There are other areas that, when you add in addition to the struggles up front, create the offensive problems that South Carolina's had. And I want to touch on one of those things coming up next to wrap up the hour. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris, wrapping up the hour here on your Wednesday on the game. Reminder again, Coach B and we're going to be on the post-game show today with Terry and Jay coming up right up at the start of the show at 3 o'clock. So be sure to tune in for that and hear his thoughts on everything that's been going on in Gamecock football over the course of these past couple of days and weeks, as it'll be the final time we get to hear from him before the holidays and obviously before the transfer portal does open up. To continue this discussion, and this entire hour is kind of turned into talking about the offensive line. Chris a moment ago mentioned, the progression from 23 to 24. And again, it wasn't like leaps and bounds crazy, but there were some improvements made over what was a very dismal year that had to do with injuries and stuff like that, 2 seasons ago. And a lot of the reason that a big part of what made the offensive line better in 24 was Sellers masking some of those inefficiencies, right? They gave up a lot of sacks anyway, but they could have given up, 10 to 15 more if Sellers took some more of those sacks where he Houdini'd his way out of the backfield and made plays happen. And you guys can speak to this better than I can, but Bill's talked about this, going back to like when Sean Elliott was the offensive line coach here the first time around under Spurrier. There's this thought about those offensive lines being dominant and all that kind of stuff, but it seems there's also a perception that maybe the elite running back play with guys like Marcus Lattimore helped mask that a little bit too. And not saying that those lines were like god awful, but maybe they looked even better because you had guys that were covering up some of those issues. And unfortunately this year, going back to where the offensive line is as of right now, Sellers made a few magic plays, but not nearly as much as he made a year ago, which amplified the issues that you had up front. So in addition to needing the offensive line to be better, you need your running backs to be better, you need Sellers to be better too next year for it all to work as one and have the kind of results and success that you hopefully had a year ago.
So you need everything to be better.
Everything to be better, yes, which, again, is why we're talking about the offense being in the hundreds and 120s in every single statistical category because nothing was good enough this year.
But that's also why we're talking about Kendall Briles coming in. And I think you need the scheme to be better. And, I think now our quarterback like Sellers, I think he can erase sacks. I think he can get you into sacks by holding on to the ball some, too long as well. And the thing that Sellers, though, also really, really helped with in terms of masking some things was just the run game numbers. I think not this past season that we just finished, but the season prior, teaming him up with Rocket Sanders, a guy who could run through tackles, a guy who could, for a big man, could have those big explosive runs as well that completely flip your numbers. And, I think that's a spot. I think you have some guys in the running back room right now you can build off of, but I'd love to see him go out and just try to find a game breaker at running back and kind of one of those guys you can build an offense around to an extent. The scheme, I think, is an aspect of this too. Early on of like the Sellers era, we were seeing teams still playing some man coverage. And I think LSU probably still did, but for the most part, the more Sellers played, the more teams said, hey, we're just going to play zone. We're going to keep all eyes on the quarterback. We're going to keep Sellers from being able to have these just big, explosive 30-yard, 40-yard runs. And, when those disappeared, it really changed the numbers completely. And so we don't know what the Briles scheme is going to be with this sort of personnel, but I do think there are some things there. Is he going to go back to like the super wide splits that we see? We saw at Baylor. We see Tennessee still doing that. The thing about those wide splits is that in theory, they're very hard to play zone against them because they spread your zone all the way out and then you just run RPOs off of it. So then if teams say, well, they're spreading us out, we're going to have to play man coverage, then you maybe have some opportunities again to get teams in man and get Sellers free and go make some of those big plays. The most simple play in football, I feel like, with a running quarterback is opponents in man coverage. You run everybody off. All the defenders have their back turned to the quarterback. And now if the quarterback breaks the first line of defense, he has an explosive run. So I do think the schematic of this thing, it won't fix everything, but it will potentially open up some of those things you're talking about. But yeah, I think everything we're talking about doesn't have to improve from like worst to first, but if every aspect we're talking about improves a little bit, the overall picture I feel like will improve a ton.
Yeah, I think so. And again, back to all those things, and what you said, Tyler, and what you said Bill was talking about, Look, that's the case really everywhere. If you look at any team that has a good running game, maybe there's some smoke and mirrors to it schematically at times. But if you have a good running game, I'm going to take an educated guess that you have a really, really good running back, really, really good running back room. You don't run the ball as one of the best rushing teams in the country if you just look year to year and go, they don't really have any guys there. Like typically those teams do. So, last year, yes, part of the reason why the run game was a top 25 running game for South Carolina was because you had Rocket Sanders, who in 2022 with Kendall Browse rushed for 1,400 yards in the SEC. So it wasn't something you had to maybe imagine that he could be a really good player. You also had Sellers, right, doing Lenora Sellers things, running the football like we saw, great example in the Clemson game. If he doesn't do that, South Carolina doesn't run for whatever it was that they ran for. He was 166 by himself in that game. The rest of the run game was just kind of solid. So it does work hand in hand. But you make a great point, Wes. Can you improve everything all at once and maybe not dramatically? That's probably unfair, frankly, to expect. But can you upgrade your personnel in the running back room, along the offensive line, and have that work in harmony with what you're doing schematically, and then be able to teach the guys also within the structure of the scheme to go execute it better? Like, you need all those things. And if you can do that to some degree, you've got a chance to turn it around and be better.
All things figured out this offseason, that's for sure. Again, Coach Beamer coming up later today on the post-game show from 3 o'clock with Jay and Terry. We'll obviously talk about what he has to say coming up on tomorrow's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show up next. We'll get back into what happened for men's basketball last night up next during the game.
All right, everyone, as we close out the hour here, let's tell you about our friends over at Krantz Cooling and Heating. If you haven't noticed, pretty cold now. And so you want to make sure that your HVAC system, specifically your heat, is running in